Senator Sanders, thank you for joining us. So the backdrop of this is that you're making a number of trips. You've been to Kansas, you've been to Michigan, you've been to Mississippi. You're heading to West Virginia this weekend, I believe. All of them are what is traditionally known as a red state, although we don't really like those labels at the Huffington Post. And you're talking about jobs, infrastructure, the need for affordable care. I guess the question, it may seem like a silly question, but my question is just why? Why do this?
I'll tell you why. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, and I agree with you. I am not crazy about this red state, blue state division. I kind of don't believe it. What is really interesting and important to note is where we are going in West Virginia on Sunday night is, I beg your pardon, on Monday, is one of the poorest counties in America. It's a county where unemployment is extraordinarily high, where the education level is low, where we have an opioid epidemic. And guess what? Trump won that county by almost 3-1. It was a landslide victory. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, not just with regard to McDowell County, West Virginia, but counties and communities all over this country where people are in pain, where they're hurting, where they're working longer hours for low wages, if they're lucky enough to find jobs where they can't afford to send their kids to college. Why have they rejected the Democratic Party and moved to a total phony by the name of Donald Trump? Why? What happened? And how do we change that?
Because the reason I ask why is because there's an incredible amount of action happening in D.C. I mean, we have a huge debate over the health care bill. We have protests happening in the street today over the perception and treatment of women in the workforce. The Muslim, I don't have to go through the list for you. And you're a United States Senator. Are you implying in some respects that the action really isn't in the Capitol, that people in the Capitol need to get outside?
Look, it is both. There is an absolute necessity for an inside and outside strategy. It is absolutely imperative that the Democrats stand up in every way possible against Trump's extremist agenda, against the lies that he states virtually every single day, against his effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act and replace it with something that is totally pathetic. His efforts to give huge tax breaks to billionaires while cutting programs that working families desperately need, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I am paid to do.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, being in the minority here in the Senate, minority in the House, having a right-wing Republican president, the only way we're going to win this, and I think we can win this, is when millions of people stand up, especially in states that Trump carried, and say, excuse me, we did not elect you to be president to throw us off of health care. We did not elect you to be president to cut back on the child care that we desperately need.
Sure.
That's not why we elected.
Well, the implied in this is that there was a bit of neglect from the Democratic Party in the past.
A bit of neglect?
Yeah.
No, not a bit of neglect, an enormous amount of neglect. The truth is, and I think anyone who objectively assesses the situation has to appreciate that the model that the Democrats have followed for the last 10, 20 years has been an ultimate failure. I mean, that's just the objective evidence. We are taking on a right-wing extremist party whose agenda is opposed time after time, issue after issue, by the vast majority of the American people. Yet we've lost the White House, the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate,
most state
two-thirds of the governor's chairs, and close to 900 legislative seats all over this country. How can anybody not conclude that the Democratic agenda and approach has been a failure?
Now, one thing I know in these states that you've gone to and are going to, 3 of the 4 you won in the Democratic primary, Mississippi being the one that did not fall in your column. Is part of this in a personal sense that you brought these people into the political process who hadn't been there before, and a lot of people who did not and continue to do not associate themselves as Democrats. Is part of what you're doing trying to sort of formalize that arrangement to convince them that the party is a place where they can channel their activism?
I don't look at it really like that. I mean, often I end up in states because I'm invited to go to places, and we will continue to go to more places. I think essentially, and why I really dislike this red state, blue state business, is that my personal record, and what I believe to be the case, is if you talk common sense to people, if you ask people, do you think your kids should be going to tuition-free public colleges and universities? You know what people will say overwhelmingly? Yeah, I do think so. Do you think we should give tax breaks to billionaires? And people say, you're out of your mind, you're crazy.
Sure.
Should we cut Social Security? And they say, what are you talking about? My mother can't make it on $13,000 a year. You want to cut Social Security? The enormous failure of the Democratic Party has kind of turned its back on those people and those issues.
Well, one reason that and correct me if you think my theory is wrong here, but one reason that Trump was able to relate to them was that he was able to stigmatize a separate portion of the population. The immigrants coming to the country are taking your jobs. Take out your frustration on them. Muslims are making you less safe. Take out your frustration on them.
That is absolutely part of his approach.
So when you are talking to these communities, and you have all this action going around immigration policy, refugee policy in Washington, D.C., do you find it difficult to break through that noise?
I don't.
How do you do it then?
Well, I don't, because I think the point is that what we have got to recognize is that somebody picking strawberries in Florida for $8 an hour is not really your enemy. The enemy that you have are folks on Wall Street who have developed policies which nearly destroyed this economy. Your enemy, if you like, is the drug companies who are making billions in profits and selling you a product which is unaffordable. Your enemy is a large corporation that is profitable, that is shutting down in America and moving to Mexico and paying people $3 an hour. Let's focus on those people who, in fact, really do impact your lives. Now, I understand, you're quite right, that's exactly what Trump is trying to do. That's what demagogues have always done. You pick on the weak and the powerless, and you turn a majority against them, and you deflect attention from the real causes of the problems that we face. And it is tough. I'm not going to tell you that it is not tough to deal with that. But I think if ordinary people, working class people, middle class people see that we have the guts to point out the real problems and take on the people who are causing those problems, I think we can win them all.
I have two. I know your time is very brief, so I have two questions. Maybe if I can sneak in a third. One is unionization as a part of this. I know you were in Mississippi at a unionization effort. The concept of unionization really never gets discussed as it pertains to rebuilding the middle class and getting people back into the democratic column. Why do you think it's not at the forefront of the party's agenda, or it wasn't at least under the Obama administration? And how do you go about changing that?
I think your point is well taken. I think you're right. I think we do not rebuild a shrinking middle class without a significant growth in the trade union movement. And that is precisely why I went to Mississippi, which is one of clearly the hardest states in this country to form a union. But you have people there with incredible courage now who are trying to organize at the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi. So I think that rebuilding the trade union movement, bringing more workers into unions should be should be something very high on our agenda.
Okay, the last two. One of the things about you called Trump a demagogue. You've done that before. The question comes before people in the Senate and Congress about what to do when the demagogue agrees with you on a substantive matter, and it seems like one of the few places where this could happen is on infrastructure spending. Assuming he produces a bill that's not sort of gimmicky tax breaks, but actual serious money going to communities to build airports, roads, bridges, whatever. Do you find a tension within your own self about legitimizing someone who you just called a demagogue by giving him?
It's not a question of legitimizing. It's a question of saying, look, you know what? Our infrastructure is crumbling. Do you agree? Our roads and our bridges and our water systems and our wastewater plants and our dams and our levees and our airports. It's not a question of disagreement. That is the reality.
Sure.
All right. And if we can come together with a program which is sensibly funded, not doing what Trump has initially proposed, which amounts to huge tax breaks for Wall Street and large corporations. If we can come up with a sensible program, yeah, I will be supportive of it.
Okay. And then my final question, which sort of is bled from that, which is that I think one of the fundamental questions facing Democrats right now is, are you a resistance party or are you a proactive party? And I look at your trips as sort of indication that you think you have to go out and proactively make the case. Do you think that there's a problem, or there is a risk, I should say, that the Democratic Party becomes too defensive, that the concept of resistance is so alluring that they don't actually put out a proactive progressive agenda?
What you have to do is resist, because every day we're seeing terrible, terrible things coming down the pike, whether it is immigration, whether it is the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, whether it is the attack on women's rights, transgender rights, etc., etc. You have no choice but to do everything we can to fight back against that. But If all we do is fight back, and if we give up the progressive vision, if we give up the ability to provide an alternative to the American people and say, you know what, we need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We need pay equity for women workers. We need to make public colleges and universities tuition free. That, you know what, Trump's idea that climate change is a hoax is completely insane. That we, in fact, have got to transform our energy system. We're seeing some good things in America. So it is both, I think, from a moral perspective as well as good politics, that you cannot just be defensive. You need a proactive an agenda that brings people together to fight for a new America.
All right, Bernie Sanders, Senator from Vermont, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care.
Very much.